lot of members of our community who are joining from Zoom today. We have a really exciting program of talks and presentations throughout the semester. But before I go into that, my name is Brad Flam. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability, and my office has been very happy to co-sponsor this series of presentations for, this is now the 9th year, with our colleagues in the Sustainability Council Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee, and with the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs. And we're grateful to them for their support of this program. Couple things. We do not yet have the official program. This is a draft version that I printed out, but we will have hard copies next week. So feel free to stop by. Actually, not next week. That was part of the announcement I have to give. We have one hole in our schedule this semester. Next week, we will not be having a presentation. Usually it's every Wednesday. But we had to shift things around at the last minute. So we don't have a presentation on February 11th, but on February 18th, we do. It's going to be a really fascinating talk. You'll read about it in the Office of Sustainability Bulletin. One of our students at Westchester University will be presenting with a colleague from an organization called the Post Landfill Action Network. You don't want to miss that presentation 2 weeks from today. After that, every week except spring break through April 29th, fascinating talks from colleagues in departments across campus, along with invited guests coming from a number of really interesting organizations and backgrounds. So with that plug and the hope that you'll join us for every presentation this semester, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming our first presenter this semester, Dr. Casey Schmitt.
Asante sana. Karibu. Habari sanchana. Thank you. Welcome. How's your day going? It's a little bit of Kiswahili from East Africa. Today, I'm going to be covering a lot of ground, both figuratively and literally. I'm going to be talking about 6 weeks I spent this past summer learning about climate perspectives in East Africa through the Fulbright-Hays program, specifically in the nation of Tanzania. And so I thank you all very much for coming. It's really great to see this many people in the room. Part of the reason I was in Tanzania was to get more Americans aware of the nation and its climate perspectives and climate concerns. I frankly did not know much myself before I went. I didn't know any Kiswahili, so when someone said habari to me, it didn't make any sense. Our title today comes from the Swahili language, Tuko Pamoja, which was the name of the program that I was part of. It means all of us together. And it's a phrase that resonates with a lot of the experiences, specifically when we talk about climate in Tanzania. So before I dive in today, I wanted to ask you just a few questions. First and foremost, what do you all already know about Tanzania, if anything? What do you already know about Tanzania?
And for Jane Goodall, started working.
It's true. Jane Goodall was in the western forests. Jane Goodall worked in Tanzania. And the Leakeys, yeah, Olduvai Gorge. Mary and Louis Leakey are, yeah.
Told by Oman.
Say it again.
By Oman.
It was, yeah, the coast. The coast was part of the Sultanate of Oman. And in fact, Oman, for a period, actually moved its capital to the Swahili coast in Tanzania. It's a really interesting place. Yeah.
German.
It was briefly a German colony on the mainland, briefly. And so there are fingerprints of all of these different peoples. I think the main thing, if you know nothing about Tanzania, the main thing to know is there's so much variety. Like a lot of African nations, it's not really one nation, but rather several hundred different tribal groups, cultural areas, geographical regions. there's so much to take in. And so today I said I have a lot of ground to cover. I'm only going to be able to give you a glimpse. My hope is that it sparks your curiosity about the nation, which is itself young. It was only formed in 1964 out of the former German and then British colony of Tanganyika and the coastal region of Zanzibar. It is home to 120 different ethnic groups. The Chaga, the Swahili, the Maasai, the Hadza are some of the main ones that I interacted with. It's a nation that was brought together during the decolonial period of the 1960s under the leadership of a man named Julius Nyerere, who championed a concept called ujamaa, the idea that we're only going to be able to live together if we have a sense of togetherness. If we are going to come together as a nation in the wake of colonialism, we need to build a common understanding. And Nyerere was himself a language scholar. He thought that togetherness starts with language. And so while he himself was Zanaki, he adopted the coastal language of Swahili and encouraged a nationwide project of togetherness, ujamaa, Tuko Pamoja, through an African language, Swahili. The nation has been relatively stable for the region ever since. It is notably the only nation of its 8 neighbors that has never had an official civil war. But we'll talk about that as we go on. It's a complex place. It's a huge place, and there is so much to see. So you begin with the cultural diversity, but there's also enormous biological environmental diversity. So this is the region that is home to the Great Lakes of Africa. It is home to Mount Kilimanjaro, perhaps the most iconic natural location on the continent. It's home to the Serengeti Plains. So all of the animals that a lot of people imagine when they think of Central Africa are in the nation. It's home to, as one person pointed out, the Olduvai Gorge, which is the site where the oldest hominid fossils have been found. So our oldest ancestors developed in what is now Tanzania. So that's one starting place, is the nation of Tanzania. And I'm going to share a little bit about Tanzania today. I also am going to talk about climate change. And this, I think, is probably an easier question for most of the people in the room. What do you already know about climate change?
Melting the snows of Kilimanjaro.
It is melting the fabled snows of Kilimanjaro. I know most of the folks in the room today know a lot about climate change. But I always ask this question, because these were the 2 central poles of my experience, learning about the nation and the people of Tanzania, and then learning about how climate change is specifically affecting that nation and those people, and how that nation and those people are reacting to the changes they're experiencing. So I think before I dive in, it's important to know, how is climate change affecting Tanzania? We do often think of melting glaciers. Even though it is right on the equator, there is one melting glacier in Tanzania. But Tanzania is also experiencing climate change in a much more palpable daily way for the people who live there. A lot of folks on this continent still think of climate change as an abstract, as some sort of a looming experience that hasn't quite affected their lives yet. But Tanzania is a place that is already seeing direct experiences, changes over the last 20 years alone, that are affecting the way that people live, the way that they build their homes, the way that they grow their food or get access to water. So one of the major changes in Tanzania is the shift of the Intertropical Convergence Zone. Does anybody know what that is? It's okay. I'm not a climate scientist, and I did not know this before I went. The Intertropical Convergence Zone is an air current that moves along the equator, carrying hot air. And throughout the year, as the planet moves, that current changes from north to south. And we call it the Southern Oscillation. So it goes up above the equator and then down below the equator. And that means in Tanzania, as along most of the equator, when we talk about seasons, there are 2 major seasons. Not, like the four seasons we think of here in the global north, but the two major seasons are a dry season and a wet season. And they've been very, very reliable because they rely on this current that changes very, very reliably over time. And so for a good portion of the year, you don't have much rain. That allows things to grow. And then for a good portion of the year, you have a lot of rain. Well, as air temperatures have changed ever so slightly, as water temperatures have changed ever so slightly, that pattern has shifted. And working with Dr. Kombo Kai, who's there in the bottom of the slide here, there's very, very clear data that you don't need a computer to trace. The people notice right away when the rainy season moves. So what we're seeing in Tanzania, first and foremost, is a change in the southern oscillation. What used to be a 3 to 4 month rainy season has shrunk to about a 1 to 2 month rainy season. And so whereas for generations, people could reliably expect the rains to come at a specific time, they're now having to wait for those rains. Moreover, when the rain does come, it's coming down a lot more quickly. So we kind of have two things happening in direct relationship to the changing of air and water temperatures. Less time for rain, but more rain when it comes down. What might that do? If the rain is falling for a shorter period of time, but more heavily, yeah.
The ground won't be able to soak up the water.
Exactly. The ground can't soak up the fresh water. And for a coastal nation that includes the archipelago of Zanzibar, not having that fresh water is a huge problem. So Tanzania is seeing flooding, significant flooding during the rainy season. It's affecting the ability to grow crops that rely on water. If the ground can't absorb the water as well over the right period of time, the crops start to fail. The sea levels are rising. So it is a relatively low-lying coast. The archipelago, Zanzibar, is just off sea level. And so there's land loss. And as salt water rises, there's what we call saltwater intrusion. That means even the wells and the boreholes that people for generations have used to access fresh water in those coastal communities are now finding that there's salt water getting into the groundwater. So there's lack of water. When you have such notable changes in access to fresh water and salt water, you see the animals start to move as well. So animals are changing their migratory patterns. Animals who don't have access to food that they may have always had access to, or at least for the last several generations, have started to encroach into suburban areas. And so farmers have noticed animals are coming in and eating their crops, whereas that had not been a problem before. And then, of course, whenever you have increasing water, standing water, there's disease. Malaria is a major problem in this region. And something called schistosomiasis. Does anyone know what schistosomiasis is? It's horrible. It's a disease that's carried by snails that live in freshwater, moving water. And if the snails get the parasite into human skin, it causes all sorts of problems. You can urinate blood, extremely painful and eventually deadly if not treated. So Tanzania is feeling climate change constantly. Now, where on earth do I come into all of this? Because I'm not a climate scientist and I'm not from Tanzania. Like I said, a year ago today, I knew almost nothing about Tanzania. Well, I work with a group called the International Environmental Communication Association, the IECA. My training is in communication and narrative and culture. I look at the way that people tell stories about their environment, the way that people use words or art or music to express their environment, to argue about what should be done. And through this experience, I've gotten to know a lot of people all over the globe who are doing similar work. And 2 years ago, I got to go to the United Nations Climate Conference, the COP, when it was held in Dubai, which is on the screen right now. And while I was there, I met somebody who suggested I apply for this opportunity. So through partnership with 3 organizations, I, this relative novice, got this incredible experience to go to Tanzania for 6 weeks this past summer. First, I was working with the IECA at the bottom of the screen. That's my home organization. I met folks who work with the School for International Training, which is an American organization. They're based in Vermont, but they have campuses all over the globe. And they have undergraduate classes and graduate classes. The idea is that you go and you learn about a place, and they have a program in Zanzibar that was particularly interested in climate change. How was climate change affecting Zanzibar? Through this partnership, we applied for a Fulbright-Hays faculty project. The Fulbright scholarship is a federally funded scholarship. Anybody can apply, so start thinking about it now. We applied to develop a faculty program, which means a group of us were going to go together to Tanzania. 6 university teachers, 6 secondary educators, like high school teachers. And we worked under the 2 folks at the bottom of the screen there, Saeed Omar and Richard Walls, who were based in Zanzibar. The rest of us came together, and with Richard and Saeed, we traveled all over the nation over 6 weeks, and we tried to see and learn as much as possible in the interest of bringing the knowledge back, in the interest of talking to people who are already dealing with climate change and already innovating in response to climate change, and bringing that knowledge back to places in the world where, frankly, we're not talking about them. So I do find that we don't have a lot of East African information in our classrooms. That's part of what we were there to do, is to gather information, bring it back, make it accessible and relevant to as many students here as possible in the interest of building collaboration. So we saw everything. We started on the coast in what is called Stone Town, the former Omani capital. We got to see the beaches and forests of Zanzibar. We went to the coral reefs and did some scuba to see how the reefs are being affected. We went to the island of Pemba, which is a little more remote, and saw mangrove forests. We went to the largest city in Tanzania, which is Dar es Salaam. And then we worked our way inland to some of the more iconic locations like Kilimanjaro and the Ngorongoro crater. Like I said, it was a group of us, and that was really a very good thing because we all were experts in different areas. So I could talk about narrative and communication, but we had scientists, we had a mathematician, we had artists, we had introverts, we had extroverts, and we built a cohort of people who really, spoke to each other's strengths. It was amazing, frankly. And any of you who have had the opportunity to travel outside of this country and see other parts of the world, you know how amazing it can be. We tried to fit in as much as possible. So I have a lot of vacation slides, and I'm not going to sit and show my whole slideshow, but we got to see Stone Town with the iconic carved wooden doors and fishermen who use dhows. We went more inland. We got to see more suburban regions. We got to go to some very, very rural areas where people are really scraping by on, what amounts to cents a day in American terms. In addition to the human aspect, we also saw a lot of animals. So the biodiversity in Tanzania is extraordinary. There are more native birds to Tanzania, more birds that migrate through Tanzania than any place on the planet. There's at least 3 indigenous species of monkey. So there are monkeys everywhere. This is a colobus monkey. The trees are fantastic. So I took as many pictures as I could. You have the baobabs, candelabra trees, and then all of the other iconic macrofauna. So flamingos and ostriches, Cape buffalo, and a few others who you'll see in just a moment here. It was extraordinary. What I want to do with my time today, over the next maybe 20 minutes now, is highlight my lessons. So I could talk about a lot from Tanzania, but for our purposes, I want to share the 8 big takeaways, the 8 major things I learned about climate and environment from the people who are there doing the work in Tanzania. So I want to start with the first one, which is mazingira. Whenever we went anywhere in the nation, we use the word mazingira, which is the Swahili word for environment. And we might as well start with the environment I just showed you, maybe the most iconic. How many of you have seen an image of Mount Kilimanjaro before? chances are it looked something like this, or maybe this. When I actually went to Kilimanjaro, it was amazing. When I took a photo, it looked like this, which I think is notably different. What is notably different to you? Those of you who can see the slide.
Human infrastructure.
Yeah, the human infrastructure. There's roads. There are power cables. There are human beings doing work. When we first got to Kilimanjaro, we pulled over to the side of the road and immediately wanted to take our photographs. And one or two people in my group did complain that the power lines were quote unquote in the way, that they couldn't get their, Instagram photo. But spending time around the slopes of Kilimanjaro, this image is a lot more accurate. And this is a big takeaway from me. When we think about Africa or any other place on the other side of the globe that we've never been, it's really important to distinguish between the kind of iconic, imaginary image of what that place is and what it actually is. So a huge part of my experience was recognizing when we talk about mazingira, when we talk about environment, we should never really be thinking of it as this pristine, humanless space. In Tanzania, and pretty much anywhere else on the globe, outside of maybe Antarctica, there's always going to be human impact. And I think that's the first important lesson here. And it was something I was taught every single day, that you can't talk about environment without people. I don't think this is news to everybody in this room, and I'm certainly not the first person to say it, but it's really important to always remind yourself, anytime we're talking about environment, we're talking about people. And anytime we're talking about people, we're talking about environment. These two things are directly related all the time. And anytime we're talking about an environmental problem, chances are that problem has some human roots. And anytime we're talking about a human problem, chances are it has some environmental roots. Now, you may have noticed I don't have a lot of pictures of people. That's because in much of the nation, there are actually specific interdictions against taking people's photographs without their permission. So we were told upon arrival, you really are only able to take images of certain things. There are certain buildings that you really should not take pictures of, and certainly don't take pictures of people. That means every person you see is somebody that I worked with, that I know, that I got permission to share their picture today. But for kind of a glimpse of what the mazingira of Tanzania really looks like, I took this mural. This is a public mural by the Tinga Tinga Cooperative. This is what it looked like as I made my way around Tanzania. Action everywhere, activity everywhere, people constantly moving around, doing things. That was my number one takeaway from the nation, is just how much activity there is all the time. And for me, that highlights how wrong our popular images of Tanzania are. If you think of Tanzania as this humanless landscape with just mountains and giraffes, you don't understand Tanzania. Joseph Mbile is a folklore scholar. I actually come up through folklore, so I nod to him. Mbile grew up in Tanzania, works in Minnesota now, and he wrote some wonderful work on the importance of human relationships in East Africa broadly. And it really, really resonated with my experience there. In the other lessons that I learned, the importance of people, the importance of community was paramount. When we talk about environment, we need to use this phrase, Tuko Pamoja. We are all together. So I did meet a lot of people. When I think about the environment of Tanzania, I think about the people I met as much of, and really probably more than the plants, the animals, the landscapes that I covered. So I left with that lesson, and I began looking everywhere. Sometimes the environmental, the climate effect is not in the first place you would imagine. It's not in the first place you would look. So I started looking everywhere, trying to find it in maybe unexpected spaces. And that brought me to my second lesson, which comes from something called the Indian house crow. On my second day in Zanzibar, I was trying to find environment. I'm here to learn about environment. I'm here to learn about climate. And the first thing that I noticed outside of the human was this bird, the Indian house crow. It's gorgeous and it's everywhere. And I started taking pictures of it. And I started writing in my journal, I need to learn about this bird because this is an iconic bird in the region, clearly. And then when I asked Saeed about the Indian house crow, I got the real story. This is not an indigenous species. This is an invasive species, and its name, Indian, might be a hint to that. The bird is everywhere because it has chased out all of the native birds. And when you talk to people in Zanzibar and you ask them about these beautiful crows with like such personality who get right up in your face, they roll their eyes and they say, oh, those effing crows. They hate them. They hate these birds because they chased out the indigenous birds. The indigenous crows are beautiful in their own right. I'd never seen a crow with this white underbelly here, but it was a really good first lesson for me on the ground, was that things aren't always what you expect them to be, and that the roots of climate change are often in human activities. So there's been an environmental shift here. The indigenous species have been chased off. That means we have different predators. We have different dynamics on the islands. How did these birds get there? Through Indian traders. They were on ships that were coming to do trade. And so through human activity, we have a pretty catastrophic environmental change. This again got me thinking about, okay, even if it's not intentional, even if it's not obvious, all environmental problems are also probably human problems. All human problems are also probably environmental problems. And I carried this throughout my next few weeks. Lesson number 3 is about not just carbon footprints literally, but figuratively, but also literally. So after a few days in Stone Town, we went to one of the more iconic locations in Zanzibar. This is Jambiani Beach, faces the Indian Ocean. It's beautiful, and there's a huge tourist market right now. A lot of Europeans, Russians, Germans, French nationals vacationing along these shores. And while it was again gorgeous, I actually found myself not looking at the people, not looking at the animals, but I spent the day looking at the footprints in the sand. I was walking along the beach, again, trying to tune into things that I might not otherwise notice and rethink them the way that the crow had made me rethink how climate was being affected and why. And I noticed not only my own footprint on the ground with all of this kind of juicy metaphor of a carbon footprint, what happens when a human being leaves their mark on the ground, but at other people's footprints. As I looked down on the ground, I started to notice that my footprints didn't look the same as the other footprints on the ground. So there were footprints that looked like mine, and they were usually barefoot or maybe sandals. These were the tourists. And you could tell they were the tourists because they went back and forth in these long meandering walks up the beach. But there were also darker footprints that were going perpendicular to those tourist footprints. They were going not back and forth along the beach, but back and forth to the water and then back. And they were dark because they'd stepped in something. These were fishermen. They'd been working, collecting their catches, bringing them, offloading them, and then going back out to catch more. I thought there was something interesting going on there. We had all touched the same space. We'd all interacted with the same environment. We hadn't touched each other. We hadn't interacted with each other. So you have multiple different populations from different places moving through the exact same environment, affecting the exact same environment, but not necessarily coming into contact with each other. And then the closer I looked, I realized they weren't all human footprints. There were also animal footprints. There were crab prints, turtle prints. It got me thinking even more about the different ways that we move through similar spaces. We are all moving through this collective environment at different times, but maybe not engaging one another. It's something that we need to think about, even on this campus. How many other people do you share this environment with? How many of them do you interact with and know personally? The answer to the first question is thousands. The answer to the second question is maybe a couple dozen, 100 or so if you're lucky. And I think one of the lessons I learned from just looking at footprints in the sand, is that we are all inhabiting these environments. We're all interacting with and changing these environments, but we're not necessarily experiencing in the same way, and we're not necessarily working together where we could be. I find this all the more interesting because Tanzania is the location where the oldest known human footprints were found, or hominid footprints. These are pre-human hominid footprints from the Olduvai Gorge. I got to see them. The oldest hominid footprints that we have on record. There have been people moving through this space for millennia. And I think it changes our perspective on environment when we recognize how many different humans and other beings are constantly moving through our same spaces. It changes our perspective on Mazingira. So let's really look at the human. Propagules and triads. If I'm looking at the human, I want to talk to people. If people are experiencing climate shift and other forms of environmental change, I wanted to learn how they're dealing with it. And so we talked to a lot of people. I'm going to share some of the folks I worked with most closely. The first was an NGO called Community Forests on Pemba Island. What I found from these people who are on the ground in physical contact with this place every single day is that flexible thinking is key. If your Mazingira is changing on you, you can't cling to your old ways or your old ways of thinking. And what I found all across Tanzania, not just on the coast, was people were being flexible, trying to find little creative ways to make meaningful change. The first group was Community Forests. They're particularly concerned right now with land loss. As sea waters rise and as salt water intrudes into the ground, mangrove forests are dying. So what's a mangrove? Does anyone know what a mangrove forest is? Yeah.
Forests, these trees that grow above sort of like wetland areas, like even on the coast, like their roots don't get any water, kind of suspend themselves up.
Yeah, and this is a picture of one. They grow in brackish water, so stuff that's not fully salt water, but definitely not fresh. They can only grow in these certain regions, and they've been dying because they don't have access to water. One little change that Community Forest is doing is replanting them, finding places, because once they lay their roots, the ground has something to hold on to. The roots, the mangroves literally hold the sand in place, right? So that when there is a typhoon caused by increasing ocean temperatures, it doesn't wash an entire coastline away. So we went out and we literally dropped the propagules, which are essentially the seeds that mangrove trees grow from. Little tiny steps can make a big difference. In Josiani National Forest, we worked with national park rangers. Josiani National Forest is reserved for the biodiverse community. So it's an explicitly non-human space. Now, on a national level, they are preserving this space for trees and animals and monkeys. But when we actually talked to the rangers, again, flexible thinking became important. Because when you preserve a space that has been used for hunting, agriculture, chopping down firewood for generations, what does that do to the local population? It hurts them. So one way of being flexible in our national forests is having laws that protect spaces, but also being willing to bend those rules. We worked with Hayo, who's up there in the corner. Hayo's a park ranger in Vumawimbi National Forest, and he took us on walks through the forest. He took us on one night walk where we actually went out in the middle of the night with no lights, and we saw galagos, also called a bush baby, coconut crabs. And he told us their job as rangers is to protect and preserve the forest. So there are very clear rules and laws about what can happen in these forests. However, as an unspoken rule, if they hear somebody chopping down a tree, they tend to let it happen. Why? Because you don't want to protect one aspect of your environment at the expense of another. You don't want to preserve the trees and hurt the local communities. And so it means rethinking what we mean by mazingira, but also rethinking which rules apply in which ways. People have needed to get creative to make sure that this system endures. At the end of the night walk, Hayo explained that the forest we had just walked through had already been purchased by developers from Dubai. And by this time next year, will likely be completely flattened and replaced by a hotel for all of those European tourists. So there are challenges. We need to think flexibly if we're going to take on these big challenges. One way that's being done is on the coast. So I said we went to the coral reefs. There was a massive bleaching event. What's bleaching? It's when the ocean temperatures rise, the coral can't survive in certain temperatures, and the entire coral reef can die off. The tourists are not necessarily a bad thing. If we get flexible, we think, okay, there are these overwhelming odds, overwhelming challenges before us, and we have all of these tourists with all of this money coming in. How do we defeat that? Well, maybe you don't defeat it. On Chumbe Island, they've decided they can actually use all of that tourist money to protect the environment. If you think creatively, what if you combine conservation with tourism? That's exactly what they've done. So there is a micro resort run in part by Hamis, who believes that the way forward is through a triad. Yes, we should be dedicated to conservation, protecting these environments, protecting the coral. But what if we use the tourism money to fund those efforts? What if we attract tourists to come to the region, and then while they're there, in addition to their, sunning on the beach and scuba diving adventure, they have a mandated lesson or curriculum. So when you go to Chumbe Island, part of your resort experience is learning about the environment. And when you learn about the environment, you don't feel so bad about Chumbe taking your money and using that money to fund conservation. So one creative way of dealing with these overwhelming challenges is, rather than fighting against each other, working with one another to create a triad of conservation funded by tourism that encourages education, and that education leads to more conservation. This was the spirit of my experience in lesson number 5. People are doing education, and it's not just the tourists. All over the nation, this creativity is responding. And all over the nation, we're seeing small responses to big problems. I said in this continent, climate change still feels like an abstract to many of us, but it's coming. And what I see in Tanzania is a viable path forward. We can take on big challenges through lots of small solutions. The farmers in Tanzania have had traditional ways of growing cassava for years. But people like Amur, this is Amur Mohammed, have started to create field schools, educating farmers on new ways to grow old crops. Now, if you've ever met a farmer or worked with a farmer, you may find farmers are pretty set in their ways. They tend to be conservative people across the globe. It's because they're reliant on rhythm. They know what works through generations. Amur worked for the government and realized that the government or tourists coming in and telling farmers they needed to change their farming practices wasn't working. Because you can't take some outsider from another place, put them in a community for a week and expect everything to change. So Amor said the way you make real change is teaching farmers new practices for growing crops under these conditions and proving them that the new practices yield results. That's one thing Amor told me farmers respect. Can you get a higher yield or more profit? If the answer is yes, you're going to probably convince that farmer. And so Amor has encouraged people to do things like use bat guano as manure. Not a thing that was happening before, but it's a resource they have, and it's making big results. I'm going to skip Dar es Salaam for time here and talk about Brenda Casamili. When we talk about environment and small solutions to big problems, we can think about energy. So Brenda Casamili works at the University of Dar es Salaam. Tanzania is a growing nation. It's an ascendant nation. There's an incredible amount of construction. There's new money coming in all the time, and the population is booming. People are not just making more children in Tanzania, but people are moving in from other regions. This puts a huge demand on the energy grid, and relying on fossil fuels or previous energy infrastructure to fuel that population is not sustainable. There are rolling blackouts. So one solution Brenda Casamili champions is home power plants. She's been working to get people to install wind turbines and solar panels, ways to create electricity at the home. And it's working. It's not to replace the grid. We're not going to take the entire energy infrastructure and replace it. But if every home can produce just a little bit of their own electricity, it's going to reduce that strain. Outside of university campuses, people like Mr. Chow are applying this same principle. So Chow is an auto mechanic who several years ago realized he has all of these resources around his shop and his junkyard. And he's realized he can take old automobile parts and turn them into wind turbines, generate electricity where it is. I saw this all over the place. So all across Tanzania, people are not relying on one government solution, one macro solution to solve their energy problems, but rather are finding resources where they can. Cooking a meal can sometimes include using the energy grid, using your own solar turbine, using a gas stove, and maybe a little bit of fire. It's a lot of different sources, but it's a lot more sustainable. And one of my favorite experiences was along the banks of Kilimanjaro, where one home received all of its power needs from a biogas chamber. They have 4 cows on their property. The cows produce waste. The waste is harvested in a biogas chamber. A biogas chamber collects the waste in an airtight cylinder, so you can't smell it, and it squishes it down. It squeezes out all the methane. What do you do with the methane? You pipe it out, and you can burn it. So you can use it for lamps. You can use it for stoves. The biogas removes the stink. It didn't even smell. The leftover waste then sloops out, and they can use it as manure. So you can see in the arrows here, it's slooped out, free of methane, and they're able to source their banana farm in the backyard. They even had bees along the side of the house. And this was the thing that I left most excited about. So as I reach the end of my time today, I probably won't get through all of my lessons, but the main takeaway here is people and flexibility. When we think about environment, we need to think about people and people thinking flexibly. I saw a lot of the iconic stuff. So there are people who care deeply about the environment. I did get to climb Kilimanjaro. If you want to see my slides from Kilimanjaro, I climbed all the way up. Even on the slopes of Kilimanjaro, you're seeing the climate shift. There's more rain there than ever before. I got to see the Ngorongoro crater, which is a giant crater that animals can get into, but not easily get out of. So as you drive around Ngorongoro, you see people protecting this environment. We saw elephants. We saw hyenas, zebra everywhere, warthogs, wildebeest, lions. But here again, if you think this is a place free from people, you're wrong. This is a place that has been made free from people through military action. You need to rethink, again, the overlap of human. And if you do see a place where there is not human activity, it may be because the human activity has been forced out. So after I went on these amazing experiences, seeing coral reefs, climbing Kilimanjaro, going on safari, essentially, I was reminded with a bit of a gut punch that all of those things, while amazing, came at a very human cost. My last week was about the people who had been forced out of Ngorongoro, the Maasai, who have lived there for generations. The government of Tanzania forcibly removed the Maasai from Ngorongoro, even though they don't tend to build buildings. The Maasai are nomadic, so they travel with cattle, they travel with their herds. The government doesn't love this because it's hard to tax people who don't have a home address. And so there has been oppression. In my final week in Tanzania, we worked with a group called Pingos, which works with indigenous communities, specifically the Maasai. And it was important, again, to remember that when we think about environment, we also need to be thinking about people. How do we make human action sustainable for environment, animals and plants? How do we make environmental conservation, protecting those animals and plants, sustainable for the people? And the Maasai are doing that little by little. There's a long way to go. The road ahead is through education. And so my final lesson today is about roots and shoots. Along our trips across the nation, we stopped at schools, and everywhere we went, we met with students, sometimes high school students, some people going to college. And in every single school, they had a club called the Roots and Shoots Club. Roots to lay foundation, and shoots to grow into a future. Across the nation, there's incredible optimism for the future. And while I didn't get to talk too much about individual people here today, one recurrent theme was future orientation. And it was really distinct. When you go to Tanzania and you talk to people, people are talking about the future. Even when we talk about climate change, they're talking about what can we do going forward. And I found that stunning coming from the United States, where a lot of people talk about the present or even the past, about trying to get back to the way things used to be and make them that way somehow again. People trying to preserve things as they are and not let them change. The optimistic, future-oriented energy of Tanzania was really, really inspiring, because people are recognizing this big thing is already happening. Climate change is here, and we probably can't outright stop it, but we can think forward about how we're going to address it. How are we going to change together? That is the path forward. I thank you for your time today. Asante, asante sana. And I welcome your questions if anybody wants to know more about any of this. Thank you. So I know some people may need to go, but I have plenty of time. If anybody wants to hang out, if you have any questions about anything that I showed or did not show, welcome. Yeah.
So any of the groups that are part of that are focusing on this country, they have any plan? They create plans or recommendations to give to the government, local governments, to try and help them improve, like if climate change is coming, you should water depots or this sort of thing.
That's excellent. So you said any of the groups I work with, do they make recommendations for the government? Some, yes. So some of the groups I work with work directly for the government. Kombo Kai, who was the first person I showed, and Brenda Kazimili, who works at University of Dar es Salaam, because they work for the government, they report directly to the government. Most of the other groups have a very tense relationship. So if you follow the news in October, you may have caught wind that there is some significant political tension in Tanzania. They are very proud of the fact that there has not been a civil war officially in the nation's existence, but one party has won every single election since 1964, and the validity of those elections has been questioned. The election for president was in October, the end of October, and there was resistance and protest. At least 700 people were killed for protesting the election results, and estimates go into the thousands. And for that reason, any of these groups that might critique existing governmental policy towards the environment or energy are very, very careful about staying away from that violence. People are disappeared frequently in Tanzania. And so, yeah, a lot of the groups, especially like the Pingos Forum that works with the Maasai at the end, they are not in conversation with the government very intentionally. So, yeah. Yeah.
People say your job title once again, this is like extremely extreme. I've never seen like this aspect of, I guess, you think about the climate scientists that go on and all that, but I appreciate how you presented the trip and everything else, like the art you said.
Yeah, I'm a professor of interdisciplinary studies. And it's a major in the University College here, undergraduate major. Oh, my screen share slot. And we do exactly that. We combine different disciplines. So my work is environmental in nature, but I'm trained in the humanities. And so that is my focus is I look at the humanities perspective on environment. And so interdisciplinary studies is where we go. I was going to show here, let's see if I can do the screen share again. I wanted to highlight that organization I work with, the IECA. If anybody in this room dabbles in the communication and messaging side of environment or are interested in the way that we communicate or talk about environment, there's a membership drive going on right now, and it's open to anybody and everybody. You can be a student, faculty, a practitioner, anybody who does that kind of work. If you're interested, I'll try and get the slide up here, or I can get it to you. Yeah.
I'm curious about the comments you made earlier about our connections to others in our shared space.
Mhm.
And you've come back to Westchester University with this experience and
Yeah.
these lessons. And there are other people at this university who have related experiences. I'm wondering to what extent is the learning that you were able to do through this experience connecting you to others at Westchester University? We have the Gishwati Research Field Station in Uganda that our anthropology
Yeah.
and psychology
Rwanda?
program.
Rwanda.
Rwanda,
Yeah.
yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And there are other programs like this. And
Yeah.
have you strengthened ties with other researchers and faculty and students at the university?
I have, and I'm in the process of strengthening those ties. It's part of why I was so anxious to share this today is I'm still relatively new to the university. This is my third year here. And part of why I wanted to share it is to find like-minded people I haven't met yet. But yeah, Jordan Sugar goes to Rwanda and will be going this summer, as I understand it. I've tried to seek out people who are doing similar work, people who are interested in Africa. One of the major things that I came away with, again, is the energy that's there, the potential for collaboration. And it does need that triad of like outsiders coming in, not to, take over or tell people what to do, but to support things that are already happening with the resources that we have. There's so much potential for faculty and for students, honestly. So I've tried to build relationships in the interest of building more similar opportunities for students. So those of you who are students, there is opportunity to do this. The Fulbright is federally funded. Fulbright-Hays was actually canceled about this time last year. So Fulbright-Hays, for the time being, no longer exists, but there are still Fulbright scholarships for students. And people like our abroad office here, we're trying to make opportunities for students to go out and do what I did. I'm trying to get the screen share up here because I've got links for anybody who's curious. Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you speak to that sort of communications aspect, which is one of the reasons why a lot of development has not been effective is I've got a really good idea and you should do this.
Yeah.
So how do you, if you're interested in this, get involved at a local, whether it's in our own community right here or in another location? How do you get involved to be effective in getting in touch with people on the ground where you are?
Yeah. Again, like shameless plug for my organization, but I have actually found this to be an incredible resource for doing exactly that. So I got involved in this organization 10 years ago, and it really it exists to put you in contact with people who are already doing this work, and to get to know people in specific regions, whether it's where you already are or if it's a place that you'd like to learn about and be. Networking through organizations like this has been hugely useful to me, and it's opened up opportunities to go to the UN conferences and go on this trip to Tanzania. It continues to be a great way. And then the other thing I've done is try and put a lot of the people I met in Tanzania in contact with this group. So it's kind of an ever-growing network. I don't know, I almost said woefully, but also proudly not on social media. I think most people, social media is a huge resource, but I know nothing about it because I don't have a single account. Um, and then locally, I mean, there are people in this room who are doing it locally. Every week when we come to this seminar, there's people doing this work here in Westchester in the immediate area. So those of you who haven't been to these, like, these are a great resource for knowing who's already doing that work.
I know, I was gonna pass on my question to the chat to talk more about this organization and what membership involved. I think
Oh.
You did, so
Great.
it worked out.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to make a plug for this. So again, it's open to anybody. There's like tiered ranks. I wanted to make a plug for the SIT. So this was the school that's based out of Vermont that Saeed and Richard work with. They have locations all over the globe. And the coolest thing is their master's program. So I know there's probably some master's students in the room here, but you can always look into SIT. If you get like a master's or a PhD through SIT, you get to go to 3 different locations. So you do about 3 to 4 months in one location. You go 3 to 4 months in another location, and then your final 3 to 4 months is in a location of your choosing to really build that kind of intercultural perspective on things that are happening everywhere, but in different ways. It's a really cool program, and I know it's a perfect program for at least some of the people on this campus. So look into SIT, and then, I think it's too late to go abroad in the next 6 months, but I know we're gearing up for abroad in fall and spring of next year. There's always opportunities to go places like Rwanda. That's absolutely what I would do, whether you're faculty, student, or otherwise. One thing I've learned in these last couple of years is that when an opportunity is just there, it can't hurt to take the 30 to 60 minutes it takes to apply, because I didn't pay more than $200 of my own money to spend 6 months seeing all of this stuff that I never probably could have been able to see on my own. So like when you see those opportunities, leap on them.
Right, we're at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.